Hey everyone, Yoyston here, and I hope you all are doing well, wherever you are in Middle-earth. Today I have for you all what I hope to be a rather interesting video. It's something that I've been thinking about a lot recently, and I figure actually a tier list is the best way to address it. What were the wealthiest to least wealthy places in Middle-earth? Now, I think a tier list that has renamed, obviously it's not S through D or anything like that, but wealthiest to least wealthy is a good way to go about this, so we can kind of rate all these places individually, look at what would make them rich or what would make them less rich, all of that. Now, really fast, I definitely want to say right off the bat before we jump in, this is not a value tier list. This isn't how much I like or dislike these places, and in fact, it's certainly not how good or bad these places are. I am not confusing wealth for happiness in these places or wealth for the literary value of these lands, right? I'm not trying to do it, so don't read into it any more than I'm just trying to see, what the wealthiest versus least wealthy places are. And in fact, I think what we're going to see is, based on what I've been reflecting on before making this video, I don't really think the wealthiest places will always be the most happy, right? It's kind of like what we see in Middle-earth is that humility takes multiple forms, as well as economic humility. To some degree. So we'll explore that here as we jump on in. But my friends, thank you all so much for joining me today. Hopefully this will be a fun and chill video where we uncover some interesting bits of lore. All right, so jumping in. Obviously, again, our four categories are wealthiest, right up here, to rich, to average, to least wealthy, right? I think these four categories will be enough for our purposes in the lands having to do with this tier list. I'll also, of course, link this tier list in the description below, just to attribute that. Also, shout out to PollyPlumber55 for making this tier list. Thank you so much. All right, let's start off. So we've got the Shire here first. Now, the Shire, let's talk about labor, exports, things like that. What would make them wealthy? The Shire actually has a lot going for it in terms of agriculture. A lot of hobbits have farms or gardens of some kind. But I think the biggest, if they wished to make this more profitable, I think it could even bump them up another tier, is their pipeweed. I don't think there's pipeweed anywhere else in Middle-earth quite like the Shires. So the Shire could quite easily, monopolize on that. But based on how we see it, hobbits aren't getting after it every single day and the most insane hard workers. Again, the Shire is one of the happiest places in Middle-earth. But it's also interesting that I don't think it is one of the richest. But I think it has potential to, and Saruman did too, I guess. He saw the potential for industry in the Shire. Right, and so I wouldn't put this in the least wealthy category, but I think the Shire fits solidly in average territory, because I think it has a ton going for it, and a lot of its natural, again, just how well plants grow and its natural resources and all of that kind of stuff, lend to it the ability to be insanely wealthy. Again, I think it could be in the rich category based on pipeweed and everything else in the Shire, mushrooms that hobbits like and all of that kind of stuff. But I think it fits solidly in the average tier because Bilbo, he comes back with part of a dragon horde and some dwarven money and gold and all this kind of stuff, and it makes him incredibly wealthy. One of the wealthiest people. Definitely the wealthiest in the Shire, but probably one of the more wealthy people in Middle-earth, but that's up for debate. Okay, moving on now to Mirkwood. So in Mirkwood, we've got a forest. There are multiple places that the Elves did settle or moved away from. You've got Dol Guldur, which I actually think probably takes, it would hurt the economy to some degree, having a Dark Lord's fortress, a Necromancer's fortress, just right dab in the middle of Mirkwood. But I think the Elves kind of carry with them a lot of natural beauty and grace that results in amazing weapons and all of this kind of stuff. Using what we can tell of the currency in Middle-earth, which is more or less gold, silver, copper, things like that, I think Mirkwood, I'd probably also put Mirkwood in average. I don't think it's particularly rich, Probably considering the elven areas, the elven lands, I would probably even say it's one of the less elven wealthy lands. But yeah, you can't grow much in there. I don't know about natural resources or what kind of labor you could have in the forest. But I don't know about least wealthy, simply because the elves have grand halls and all of this kind of stuff under the rule of Threnduil. So there you go. All right, Lothlorien. So this one, I struggle between the top two categories, honestly. I think Lothlorien is rather, I would probably say rich, simply because it has things found nowhere else in Middle-earth, such as Malorn trees, some of the artifacts of elves from days gone by, everything like that, and the magical enchantments. I mean, it's between these two. We're going to have to see how the wealthiest, the top category shakes out. I could see maybe later in the video. Again, I always have one or two that I shift around throughout. I feel like Lothlorien is going to be a tough one for me because I could see it becoming one of the wealthiest. You've got elves, and theoretically, if they worked for money and to change things, and if they worked to grow, I guess, an economy or GDP of Lothlorien, if we want to put it in those terms, they have infinite lifespan workforce. But I also think, kind of like hobbits, elves don't overemphasize work. They're singers, they're, artists and people like that. So I don't necessarily, again, it depends on how much a person's willing to pay for anything. Economics 101, I guess. But yeah, I think it's definitely in the rich category. Same thing here with Rivendell. You've got these artifacts of past days, Narsil, so on and so forth, but I can't tell, do they trade a lot with other factions? I feel like Rivendell is super self-sufficient, and maybe I'd even say Lothlorien in its heyday of trading with the dwarves of Khazad-dûm and so forth probably was in the wealthiest, but after the fall of Moria, when they became a little bit more secluded, that hurt the economy for Lothlorien, I would imagine, when the dwarves lost Moria to the Balrog. But Rivendell is very secluded. I'm also going to say, I'm more confident that this is in the rich category than the wealthiest category. Lothlorien, I'm still not sure. All right, now we come to Moria, Khazad-dûm. Khazad-dûm, in my mind, during its heyday, again, I guess if I'm saying during the Lord of the Rings, okay, I'll be honest, maybe even during the Lord of the Rings, it might be one of the wealthiest places in all of Middle-earth, because we obviously know Mithril. You have these dwarves that are just hard workers. I feel like that's before there was a need to fight orcs and defend Khazad-dûm or live in exile before the Balrog. You probably had so many dwarven workers just going ham, trying to get some mithril, trying to discover and expand the halls of Khazad-dûm and go through the whole mountain range and so forth. So yeah, I absolutely think Khazad-dûm is a top contender for one of the wealthiest, if not the wealthiest place in Middle-earth, simply because in its heyday, you have dwarves that were constantly craftsmen, expanding their halls, finding new places to build houses and mansions, and just, expanding Khazad-dûm, as well as always looking for mithril. And mithril, obviously, is one of the rarest and most incredible substances in Middle-earth. Now, that's during its heyday, before the Balrog. They traded with elves, they traded with men of the Vales of Anduin, and all of this kind of stuff. But even after the Balrog, even if we look at it during the time of the Lord of the Rings, you still have incredible lost artifacts. You still have potential for more mithril. It's kind of where they ran into trouble, the first time with the Balrog. But there's still potential for mithril. I think it is one of the wealthiest. I do think that. And right up alongside it, I think, honestly, Erebor also is one of the wealthiest places in Middle-earth. Wealthy enough for a dragon, Smaug, to invade. Wealthy enough for poems and songs about the rivers flowing in gold, all the way down through Dale and to Lake Town, for those to become popularized. And it's one of the central trading hubs in all of Middle-earth for toy makers and craftsmen and any sort of person looking for, I guess, economic investment with the gold from the dwarves. It is, and I would even say during the Lord of the Rings as well, this is one of the wealthiest of places in Middle-earth, which helps Dale prosper and Lake Town prosper a bit as well. But even even the elves of Mirkwood, they trade with, or at least would, and probably again its heyday, trade with the dwarves. And so this, along with the Iron Hills not being too far away, things like the Arkenstone, it's one of the wealthiest places in Middle-earth. We'll come back to this conversation, for sure. Again, Lothlorien, it's certainly wealthy, but I just don't know if it's that caliber. All right, next up, we've got the Iron Hills. Now, even though it's still a dwarven place, and obviously the dwarves are doing very well in this list, I think the Iron Hills isn't even quite on these tiers. I mean, they're called the Iron Hills for a reason. It's not like you're going to find gold or mithril or anything else there. I would probably say of the dwarven strongholds, this is probably on the average side. Now, I'm not going to say it's one of the least wealthy ones, simply because trade with Erebor, not too far away, trade with Rune and places in the east, Dorwinion, all of that kind of stuff. I would say that helps it. And, I mean, iron is still iron. It's still worth something. And if it comes in great quantities from the Iron Hills, that's really good too. Okay, next up we have Lake Town. So, it's not in the least wealthy category because by itself it has proximity to Erebor. And I'm going to do kind of Lake Town / Dale, but these places prosper with the trade with the dwarves, trading with the elves of Mirkwood. Okay, I totally forgot this, by the way, when I was talking about Mirkwood, but the wine that they import and export from Dorwinion and so forth, that they send down the river in the barrels, of course. But I don't know if that brings it up too much. Again, I can't justify putting Lake Town any higher than Mirkwood itself is. I think, yeah, it's kind of on the same level. Especially if we're talking about Lake Town in particular, you've got fishing, and you've got fishing. As it's described in the books, there's definitely some lost heraldry and wealth from its days of old, from Dale and so forth, Esgaroth, in its heyday. But it's definitely a fishing village that lives in the shadow of a dragon for a long time, and it's destroyed by that dragon, so it needs to be rebuilt. I don't think it's one of the least wealthy, but it's certainly in the average category. All right, next up we have Edoras. We have Rohan. So, okay, with Rohan, we certainly don't think of it in, I would say, any of these top two categories, because you still have a land that's very spread out. Obviously, one of the most expensive parts of their land is their horses, and their warriors and stuff like that. I mean, if the riders of Rohan ever turned mercenary, that would be just insane for their wealth. But other than that, it's not like they've got too many. From what we know, they don't really mine all that often. They farm. They have farms and horses. And again, that's probably their biggest imports-exports. They trade with Gondor, which helps. But they also have the White Mountains in the way. I don't think this is in the least wealthy category either, because if we look at the Golden Hall of Meadowseld, that by itself shows a decent amount of wealth. And yeah, their horses, again, like that is a lot of wealth there as well. But it's not on the level of like Rivendell or Lothlorien or anything like that. So there we go. All right, Minas Tirith. Oh, okay, I've got Helm's Deep in there, so we'll come back to Rohan here in a second. Minas Tirith, I think, is absolutely in the rich category. And if we bring full Gondor into this, I think it's got so much to offer. And I'm kind of doing this by region as well as, I guess, by city. Minas Tirith has farms surrounding it, and I imagine it's got some of the best artists and musicians and soldiers and scholars and so forth in Minas Tirith. It's very much like the urban capital of the world of men. Absolutely. I don't know if it's in the wealthiest category. We do know that some of the helms of like the highest royal guards in Minas Tirith, they have a bit of mithril in their helmets. That's like a very deep lore bit. And if we take Gondor's past expansion era into consideration, I think when it spanned from the sea all the way to Rune, it's probably in the wealthiest if we're taking it by region. But yeah, just the city itself, certainly goes down a little bit, but if we're taking the whole region, you've got farms, you've got fishing, you've got warfare through boats, through soldiers, you've got some of the best blacksmiths in the world of men. I think of the world of men, Minas Tirith and Gondor are perhaps the richest, but I just don't think it equals that dwarven quality, if you know what I mean. With mithril and gold just everywhere and all that kind of stuff. So, getting back with Helm's Deep with Rohan here, I think, it's tough. I almost wonder if Helm's Deep is not quite as wealthy as Edoras, because surrounding Edoras and all of that is the farms and more access to horses and so forth. Obviously, this list wasn't quite... I had to tweak the list a little bit to make it fit the purpose of this video for rich versus least rich. So I think I'm just going to stick these together and just call that Rohan. Yeah, I think that makes the most sense. Okay, Bree. I think Bree is actually in the least wealthy category. You have traders that come through from the Blue Mountains, dwarves, and so forth, but you also have ruffians and brigands that come up from the south. Bree can't defend itself. We know that when the Rangers leave, and I want to make a video about this at some point soon, but after the Rangers leave and go south to help Aragorn, the brigands pretty easily kind of, I don't know if fully overtake is the right phrasing, but they definitely assert their influence from Isengard in Bree and its surrounding areas and its farms quite easily. I don't think there's a ton of people in Bree. I don't think there's a ton of economic activity. If you're in the world of men, this actually seems like one of the poorest places in Middle-earth to live. And again, that's not a statement of value or quality or anything like that, but Bree kind of seems pretty grim of a place. There's crime, there's not a lot going on, there's not a lot of defense. It seems like a sketchy area to live in the world of men. So I do think like it also goes along with that least wealthy. Yeah, and I also think if Isengard hadn't been involved, if men from the south, from Sauron's influence, hadn't come to Bree to kind of make it more crime-ridden with them being brigands under Sauron's influence, Bree probably could have risen a little bit higher up. But yeah, yep. It's got traders that come through, and I think that's probably one of the biggest things that it's got. It's got the prancing pony, of course. But yeah, from everything we read and that we know about it from the lore, it drives us to think that Bree is one of the least wealthy places in Middle-earth, for sure. Okay, Isengard. So Isengard is actually a perfect example of what I said at the beginning of this video, of the happier a place is, it doesn't necessarily mean the wealthier it is. And I think Bree is one of those things that actually kind of goes against that rule. Bree doesn't seem like a super happy place in the lore, at least, but it's also not super wealthy either. Isengard, when it was beautiful and green and Sauron knew the trees and knew of the Ents a bit and trusted and loved nature, it was more beautiful, it was more of a happy place and more welcoming. But I think it was less wealthy. Then, when Sauron turns to industry and Uruk-hai and orcs and cutting down all the trees and making everything horrible, he got wealthier, right? It made it wealthier. Iron pulled out for armor and metal for weapons and steel and swords and destruction and death. He also invented one of the first explosives besides fireworks in Middle-earth. And that kind of industry and ingenuity and stuff, I hate to say it, but I think it's in the rich category. Is it quite up here? I don't think so. But very much in its own way, like Isengard, if Sauron had won, he would have led the industrial revolution of the world, and all that was green would have turned to ash and dust. And sure, does that kind of create more wealth in many eyes, especially in the eyes of certain men, right? Of not elves or hobbits or even dwarves, but sure. So yeah, I think Isengard gets from maybe average, because a wizard still lived there. It used to be a place of Gondor, and it went up to rich when he industrialized. So there's that. Mordor. I think Mordor... This one is maybe one of the toughest ones to even rate on this list, simply because how much would anyone pay for the Morgul spells and the black sorceries that come from Mordor? It builds things like Grond, which is insane. But I don't know if it industrialized in the same way that Isengard did. So I actually think Mordor is kind of in the average category as well. We have a lot here. But I don't think it's particularly wealthy. However, to feed the armies of Sauron, to be able to create these giant hosts and arm them all and create stuff like the Grond, it has to be relatively wealthy. So it's between, I'd say, rich and average. But it's not quite, in my mind, it's not quite on Minas Tirith's level or Isengard's level. It's just not quite there. It's more like they just use their overwhelming population of armies, but not particularly good armies. That's why so many orcs get absolutely wrecked by the Riders of Rohan and by the soldiers of Gondor. They're not particularly good. There's just a lot of them. It does have influence over many other lands, and that tribute that they get from the east might bring it up, but I think I'm good putting it in average. If you want to see tier lists like this, I know some people don't like it, you might see it as, like, I would say maybe the top of average, but yeah, there you go. All right, the Fangorn Forest. Depends on what one considers to be wealth and what one considers to be worth money and all of this kind of stuff. But in most, if we're talking to economists from Minas Tirith, I'd probably say, unless you were looking to industrialize, the Fangorn Forest doesn't have a ton to offer. The Ents weren't wealthy in that same way, like they weren't carrying around bags of money, for sure. Lots of natural resources, but as Saruman found out, wasn't quite worth it. Wasn't quite worth it. So I think Fangorn Forest might be one of the, I don't know if I'd say happier places, because it's kind of scary and grim in its own way, but it's certainly got its own natural vibe to it going on. Seems happier than Isengard, is what I'll say. I'd rather hang out in the Fangorn Forest than Isengard during Isengard's industrial era. So, there you go. All right, Tom Bombadil's land. Same sort of thing. But even then, I'd probably rather spend more time in the Old Forest with Tom Bombadil than even in the Fangorn. It feels like a little less dangerous, even though you have the Barrow Downs. So, the Barrow Downs and Cardolan and all of that, if we're taking those surrounding areas, that would push up the wealth, simply because of ancient artifacts and stuff like that. But I actually don't think we are talking about that. I think we're talking about the Old Forest, Tom Bombadil's house, and, the Old Man Willow. And so I don't know. Like, Tom Bombadil could make something as precious and wealthy as the One Ring itself disappear and reappear. But is he wealthy in gold and mithril and gems? No. Is he happier than many of those who are? Absolutely. So again, I would also put that in some of the least wealthy area. Goblin Town. That's funny, I didn't see I didn't look close enough to see Goblin Town before I started the video. Dude, there's no way that they're that wealthy. They're living in the cold mountains. They're scavengers. I have no reason to believe that Goblin Town is wealthy at all. It might, in fact, be the least wealthy place on the whole list. It's got goblins, but again, I don't think they're well armed, like, at all. The time when they had the most expensive items in their grasp, it was Glamdring and Orcrist and, I guess you could say Narya, Gandalf's ring, and Sting, and the One Ring, but they didn't know, and when they did know, they got absolutely destroyed by the people who wore and bore those artifacts. So, yeah, Goblin Town is going down here. Beorn's land. So we're talking about the Beornings. I'm also going to throw the Vales of Anduin and the woodsmen of the Greenwood Forest and so forth in here. I think they are average, actually, simply because the honey cakes of the Beornings would be actually incredibly valuable and incredibly rare. That delicacy would be incredible. Also, they trade with the elves, they trade with the dwarves of Moria before it became Moria. I don't really have reason to believe that it's one of the least wealthy. The natural resources of the Misty Mountains and the Anduin and the Mirkwood Forest, it probably puts it up to average. But again, this is where I struggle with, maybe I should have had one more tier in here. I did take one out. But like Mordor and Beorn's land, I don't know if they're on the same, or the Shire and Beorn's land. Because the Shire has better soil for growing, but then Beorn's land has probably more wildlife, so it's better for hunting. Maybe they are on the same level. Okay, Minas Morgul. we're getting almost to the end here. So Minas Morgul, in its heyday as Minas Ithil, I don't know how prosperous the Ethel Duath, the Mountains of Shadow, are, or even stretching up to the Mountains of Ash north of Mordor. I don't know if there's materials or anything in there. If we're counting it as a part of Gondor, that helps it, but as Minas Morgul, I think it's average, right? It's a great fortress in terms of strategy and strength, and it's probably got a lot of Morgul secrets and sorcery and things that might be worth a lot in that regard there. But at the same time, I don't have reason to believe that it's incredibly wealthy. All right, the Grey Havens. Lindon, right? We can even just take on the Kingdom of Lindon. Obviously, by the late Third Age, it was kind of small and cut off from many of the other elven lands and so forth. However, certainly not in the least wealthy category, because of the ships that could sail to Valinor. These are perhaps the best travel ships in all of Middle-earth, because they're meant to make it over the sea to the lands of the Valar. Also, it's got ancientry, it's got this elven lineage and so forth. You know, I think, I don't know, it's one of those it's either rich or it's average, but I think it probably has more relics of old. And again, the ships and the ship crafting, it really bumps up the economy quite a lot. I think I'm putting it in the rich category. To reassess, going back to Lothlorien, because Lothlorien, Rivendell, Grey Havens in the rich category. I don't know if I can put any of them quite in the wealthiest category. You know, simply because, I just don't think they have as much raw gold and diamonds and the things that are just insane in terms of money worth. And financial worth. I don't think it's got any of the same as Moria or Erebor. So I think this is where I'm leaving the list. Yeah. So to recap here, with wealthiest, we have Moria and we have Erebor. Now, between the two of those, thinking about it more, I actually think I'm going to put Erebor up at the top, especially during the Lord of the Rings. If we're looking at them in their heyday, then I think Moria takes the cake. But at the pinnacle of the War of the Ring, Erebor is probably the wealthiest place in all of Middle-earth. I mean, just the amount of gold alone that mountain contained. Obviously, the Hobbit movies probably overdid it in that, but still, probably not by much. And there was still more to be found in Erebor. It was quite it's quite the mine, and obviously, that's what drew Smaug to it. Now, it wasn't the wealth of Moria that drew the Balrog to it. I don't believe so, at least. But it was the wealth of Erebor that drew the dragon to it. So I'm saying Erebor, I think, is the wealthiest place in all of Middle-earth, at least by the late Third Age. Earlier, if we're talking First Age, I think Khazad-dûm, probably. After that, we got Lothlorien, Rivendell, Minas Tirith, Isengard, Grey Havens, all for different reasons, but they have a lot of economic things going for them, or they have a lot of artifacts of old. The elves, just by virtue of carrying so many things from the First Age and having knowledge of craft and lore and all of that, probably just ups their economic potential and GDP or whatever you want to call it. Then we've got, on average, Mordor, the Shire, Mirkwood, the Iron Hills, Lake Town, Edoras, Helm's Deep, Bjorn's Land, Minas Morgul. I think all these places are totally fair. They've got maybe one or two things going for their economy in a big way. They've got some trade coming through here, but it's nothing insane. It's nothing crazy, based on what we can see. Again, Mordor, you might argue, it goes up to rich. It has Palantiri there and all of that kind of stuff. Whatever secrets Sauron had, who knows? But then finally, at our least wealthy category, we've got Bree, we've got Fangorn Forest, Tom Bombadil's Land, and Goblin Town. I don't know. The most expensive relics in Goblin Town were probably things stolen from dwarves in Gundabad or from Moria. So, there we go. But if I were to add Gundabad, it'd probably be in this category, the rich category. But my friends, let me know what you all think. Was this an interesting video? Would you like to see more like this? I've just been trying to figure out, how can I make a video talking about wealth in Middle-earth? And I actually think this was a very interesting way to do it. Again, final reminder, because I feel like I'm still going to get comments about it. I'm not saying the wealthier is the more valuable or least wealthy is less valuable. I love how Bree is shown in The Lord of the Rings Online. I love Moria and Erebor, obviously, But, some of these places, like the Shire or Minas Tirith or the Grey Havens, like, I love so many of these places. But I wouldn't necessarily say that wealth and happiness or wealth and value run in the same vein. Lothlorien, Rivendell, love all these places for sure. So I'm not assigning a value statement to it other than in economic terms. So, my friends, thank you all so much for watching. If you'd like to support the channel, all the usual links and everything in the description below. We've got Mythology Candles. If you'd like to buy some candles, go through that link and use the code in the description for 10% off your first order. Go to Castle Con for any Lord of the Rings replicas, all of that good stuff. The best way to help the channel is join our Patreon, join our memberships, gain access to our Discord server, our monthly podcast as well. We've also got some merch that you can take a look at. And check out our second channel, Masters of Mythology. And thanks to our Valor tier patrons and YouTube members, Joby Weasel, Ed Patterson, Comic Nut 64, Zoomi, and Peter Sheppard. My friends, thank you all so much for joining me on this adventure. Until the next one.